Some time ago, in a small city somewhere in Nigeria, a lady named Maaka was homeless. She had two children, Akudo, who was 7 years old, and Ikem, who was 4. Maaka and her children had been living on the streets for months, struggling to get by. She was an orphan who grew up in an orphanage where she had met her ex-husband, Obi. She was the breadwinner of the family, but when she lost her job, her husband abandoned them, leaving her to fend for herself and her children. She worked as a cleaner at a small clinic and had to struggle to make ends meet, working double shifts to provide for her family. Her ex-husband, Obi, had been unemployed for a long time, claiming he was unable to find work due to a supposed injury. However, in reality, he was lazy and content living off Mwaka's earnings. He spent most of his days playing chess, gambling away the money he never made, expecting his wife to support him and their children. Despite his wife's effort to convince him to seek employment and contribute to the family, Obi refused. He finally started a relationship with a rich lady who promised to take care of him, but only if he abandoned his family and followed her. In the daytime, Maaka would beg for money or food on the streets. At night, she would search the refuse bins of restaurants for food. One day, while going through a waste bin belonging to a restaurant, she met a woman named Ndidi. Ndidi offered to buy food for her and her kids from a nearby restaurant. Maaka accepted. She also offered them a place to stay, promising that she and her kids would be fine. Maaka had no choice. She was already feeling guilty of exposing her children to the wild and ruthless life on the streets, and any shelter at all was welcomed. Ndidi was a woman in her early 40s. She was very friendly and kind to Maaka and her kids. She was elegant, and you could tell from the expensive jewelries, clothes, and car that she was very rich. She was a very successful woman who owned a chain of boutiques and real estate investments. She had no biological children of her own, but she sponsored a lot of children. One day, Maaka sat down with Ndidi. She told Ndidi that she didn't want to be a charity case. She said she wanted to work for her money. So, she begged her to give her a job at one of her boutiques. Ndidi looked at her and said, "Are you not tired of working for other people? Don't you want to own your own business? Be your own boss?" Maaka said she wanted to, but she had to work to save money to start up a business. Ndidi then told her about a club she belonged to. She said it was an organization that helped women financially. Maaka had her doubts and was uncomfortable about the mention of a club, but Ndidi convinced her that it was nothing serious. Still having her doubts, she decided to follow Ndidi anyway. She had been living on the streets for months now, under the rain and sun with her kids. She wanted to give them a better life, as long as she didn't have to commit a crime. The next day at 9 p.m., after she put her kids to sleep, she left the house with Ndidi. It was a mansion almost on the outskirts of town. When they got there, she was taken to the leader of the club, an elderly woman with very grey hair. They sat down in a lavish living room. The old lady welcomed her to the club. Prosperity, riches, and protection come at a price. Are you willing to pay for it? She asked. Maaka replied, "It depends on what the price is. I want to get out of poverty, but I'm not willing to do it at the cost of any life." The old lady laughed and promised it was nothing like that. She promised that she wouldn't have to kill anyone. With that assurance, Maaka agreed. A big red clay pot was brought. The old lady made some incantations. She made Maaka repeat a pledge after her. She also had her mention the names of her kids. She said it was for their protection. After her initiation, the old lady gave her 100,000 naira and asked her to start a business of her choice. She accepted the money and they went home. 2 weeks later, after Nwaka's initiation, she moved out of Ndidi's house to a 3-bedroom flat she rented in the heart of town. Everything was moving on well. She had opened a small restaurant. She had lots of customers on a daily basis. She also had orders coming in online. Her business was booming. 3 months after she started her first restaurant, she opened up 2 more. She enrolled her kids in the most expensive school in town. 8 months after that, she bought her first car. She was so grateful to her friend Ndidi and the club. Her life had literally gone from zero to hero in a short while. One day, Mwaka got a call from the school. The principal requested her presence urgently. She was told that her daughter, Akudo, had not been participating in class activities. She hardly talks or interacted with anyone. She just stares all day in school. Even when she speaks, she made no sense. Mwaka was surprised because Akudo interacted at home, although she seemed aloof lately, and she did not think it was anything serious. She was advised to see a child psychologist for help. But seeing a child psychologist did not help. Akudo kept getting worse. She would refuse to get out of bed, eat, or even shower. She would just mope all day, and even when she tried to communicate, she made no sense. Mwaka was worried. She hoped that the club did not have anything to do with her daughter's condition. Ndidi had told her it was a club that helped to support women, but she had found out that it was a sisterhood. It was a cult. They had their monthly meeting every last Friday of every month, and in every gathering, they would retake their oath. She would mention her children's name again. Other women mentioned names too. Some dropped items she couldn't see into the pot. She decided to speak with her friend Ndidi about it. During their conversation, her friend had made a statement. You have to give something to get what you want. What do you mean by that? Asked Nwaka. Why do you think you always mention your children's name? I was told it was for their protection. I was told I didn't have to harm anybody, especially not my children. I was told that I was mentioning their names for protection. And you are, said Ndidi. They are not going to die. You are just taking something from them. That's all. Besides, you have enough money to give them the kind of life you want. Take them abroad. Send them for therapy. Whatever you have to do to alleviate the situation. Mwaka became angry. Why didn't Ndidi tell her all this from the beginning? Her kids are the most precious blessings in her life. To think that she had to take something from them to stay rich was torture to her soul. And what would the cult be taking from Ikem? The thought of it made her sick. She had to do something. She wasn't going to risk the life or abilities of another child. She went to see the old lady and requested that what she did be undone. The old lady said it wasn't possible and advised her to go home. After much pleading, the old lady told her to go home, that she would provide a solution in the next meeting. When Maaka got home, she looked around her home. She had everything she ever wanted. sleek cars, 5 big restaurants with over 200 workers. Her restaurants were all 5-star. She had been able to achieve all this in less than 2 years. She had moved into her lavish mansion with her kids a month ago. She was literally living a dream, but without joy or peace. She walked into her daughter Akudo's room. Akudo was on her bed, sleeping so peacefully, but peace was far from her. Tears welled up in Maaka's eyes and poured down her cheeks. How did she get here? She wondered. She felt so guilty for what she had done. She was desperate to get herself and her kids off the streets, but was living in a mansion without joy or peace of any comfort to her. 2 weeks later, and it was time for another gathering. The old lady told Maaka there was a solution to her predicament. She said to save her daughter, Maaka had two options: go mad and live on the streets for 14 days every month for the rest of her life, or feed on the blood from her menstrual cycle every day of her period for the rest of her life. Maaka was furious. Neither of the options was a solution to her predicament. She told the club she wasn't going to do neither of the two. She said she wanted out of the group and threatened to expose them. The old lady became angry. She said there was no way they were letting her go. Either she does what is required, or both her and her children will die. Maaka was devastated. She did not come all this way to go mad and live on the streets for 14 days. The thought of feeding on her menstrual waste made her want to vomit. She was stuck. The cult had threatened to kill her and her daughters if she ever left or exposed them. What was she to do? She had no one to confide in, and she already broke her friendship with Ndidi. She went into Ikem's room, and there she was, sleeping so peacefully, oblivious to what was about to happen to her as a result of her mother's wrong choices. She already made one daughter useless. She wasn't going to do that to Ikem. The mother in her refused to that idea. This was all her mistake. This time, she would be paying the price herself. At the next gathering, Maaka agreed to do what was required. She begged the old lady to set Ikem free, but the lady said it was out of her hands. The sacrifice will switch as soon as she does what is required. 1 week later, Maaka's period started. There was no easy way to do what she was about to do, but she had no choice. She removed her pad when it was full. Bringing it to her nose, she almost threw up, but she summoned courage. She placed one hand over her nose in an attempt to stop herself from perceiving the smell of the blood. Then slowly, she placed her lips on the pad and sucked it. As soon as she swallowed it, she started to vomit. After she emptied her stomach, she lay down on the bed and cried herself to sleep. That night, she had a terrible dream. Her youngest daughter, Ikem, had been tied to a stake. A group of people gathered around her, cheering, as an old lady held up a knife. She woke up with a start, rushed to her children's room just to make sure they were fine. When she was convinced they were still alive, she started to return to her room. But then she remembered what the old lady had said. The sacrifice will switch as soon as she does what was required. She had vomited everything in her stomach. She had to do it again. She hurried back into her room, pulled out her pad and started drinking from it. At first, it was hard to swallow, and she almost threw everything up again, but forced herself and held it down. Every night, throughout her period, Maaka would drink the blood from her private area, and this went on for months. She became very sickly, treating one infection or the other. She went from her bubbly, happy self to withdrawn, moody, and unhappy. Her employees wondered about their madam and what was eating her up. A few times, one of her managers, a middle aged Christian woman, had asked what the problem was and offered to help. But Mwaka had said she was fine, just stress. She was glad about one thing though. Ikem was safe and going to school. Akudo, her first daughter, had deteriorated. She had become bedridden. Every attempt to treat her with orthodox medicine had failed. Doctors had suggested to Mwaka to fly her abroad for treatment. She had agreed, but she knew deep down inside that nothing could be done for her. So she hired two nurses to provide round-the-clock care for her. As the days went by, every month during her cycle, Mwaka would feed on nothing else but her waste. Her businesses boomed. She became the top and most richest hotelier in the hospitality business in Nigeria. But with the newfound fame and wealth came a high price she had to pay. She became thinner, paler, and sicker. She had begged the courts to end her life instead, but the old lady had said it could not be done. She was to be a living sacrifice until the sisterhood had taken all they could from her. And if she ever tried to take her life, the sacrifice would switch to her daughter Ikem. One night, she entered her daughter Akudo's room, knelt down by her bed, and in tears, she begged for forgiveness. She slept beside her daughter that night, as if she knew that was the last time she would see her. The sisterhood instructed her to leave the body untouched for 7 days. After Akudo died, Mwaka paid off her domestic staff and asked them to go. Those 7 days were one of the worst days of her life. The first night, Mwaka and Ikem could not sleep. All the lights in the house kept coming on and off. Ikem was terrified, so was Mwaka. They managed through the night, but the next day, she packed a few of Ikem's belongings and took her along to work. She begged her manager, Mrs. Okoli, telling her that she needed to travel for a few days and wanted Ikem to stay with her and her family till she returned. Mrs. Okoli agreed, happy to aid her boss in any way. That night was even worse than the previous night. The lights kept coming on and off, and there was a loud noise like someone was banging the wall. This went on for days. After the 7th day, she carried her daughter to the cemetery and buried her. Word had spread around town of Akudo's death. There were speculations and people calling her a ritualist. After Akudo died, Mwaka sank deeper into depression. She wasn't eating. She couldn't sleep. Each time she closed her eyes, she would see the face of her innocent daughter. She didn't even leave the house, not even for business. Ikem had been with Mrs. Okoli and her family for over a week, and Mrs. Okoli had started to wonder and worry why her boss hadn't returned to the office. So she went over to the house to see how she was faring. Would God ever forgive me? Mwaka asked. God is willing and able to forgive us if we confess and turn from our evil ways, Mrs. Okoli had replied. I've done a lot of terrible things, unforgivable things, she said. How is Ikem doing? Mwaka asked. She's doing well, but she misses you a lot. Mwaka smiled. It was the first time she was smiling in a long time. I miss her too, but she is better off without me. I have to embark on a journey just one last time. When I return, I will come to get her. Please, she pleaded. Until then, keep Ikem with you. I will make some money available to take care of her. When Mrs. Okoli left the house, she was bothered. She knew something was not right. She made up her mind to speak with her pastor the next day regarding her boss. The next day, the town was abuzz with the news of Maaka's mansion being set ablaze. The fire service department struggled to kill the flames to prevent it from spreading. By evening, the fire had died down, but the mansion had been completely destroyed in the fire, with what looked like Maaka's body in it. It was a sad story with speculations of suicide in the news. A week after Maaka died, her lawyer contacted Mrs. Okoli. In her last testament, she had left Ikem in the care of Mrs. Okoli and her family. 60% of all she had was to go to Ikem. 20% was to go to Mrs. Okoli and her family, and the other 20% she ordered to go to a foundation for the homeless and motherless. In her personal letter to Mrs. Okoli, she thanked her for showing her love and kindness and requested that Ikem be raised in the fear of God. Lessons to be learned from this story. Be careful when accepting gifts or favor from people you do not know. Be careful to find out the agenda of any group before you join. Happiness and family is paramount. If wealth is to be gotten at the expense of family and happiness, then it is not worth having. Not all that glitters is gold, for the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is life eternal. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know in the comment section what you took away from this story. Share the story with your friends or your family. Anyone who you know will enjoy the story too. Don't forget to like the video. And if you aren't subscribed, please subscribe and become a part of the family. And after you subscribe, don't forget to turn on your notification bell